Hi, everybody. I see some old friends that I haven't seen for a while. So good to see you. And new friends and who's here for the first time. That's always such a gift to us to have new people. And I hope um, that your time sharing here with us is beneficial. We need each other, as a matter of fact, is how I'm feeling right now. So I'm glad you're here. Um, Today is July 2nd, and I was thinking about the 4th of July. But before I say something about the 4th of July, and because I don't want to forget, um, I just want to thank my teachers and thank you for being here. And thank Roshi Joan for creating this. And I'd like to dedicate from all of us whatever benefit is stirred up maybe from our time together, to dedicate that to her healing. And hopefully she'll be back with us soon. She's a force. I have faith. Look what she created. Yeah. So I lived on a farm for many years. It was a collectively owned farm, and one of our farm partners renamed the 4th of July Interdependence Day, which I thought was pretty awesome. And he would have an Interdependence Day party every year. And got me thinking about independence and freedom, right? Let freedom ring. And what those are for me and what those are for us. And it's very interesting, the Interdependence Day thing, because I think for us, independence, or at least for me when I think about it, is freedom from the delusion that I'm separate. That's where the place from which my freedom arises. So independence is the freedom inherent in living an awakened life. That's true independence, which is a life lived from the realization that we're all dependent on each other and all of life. So independence, interdependence, one big, beautiful teaching to me. So, in honor of our farm partner Slippy, happy Interdependence Day, and maybe we'll start a movement. You can pass it on, anyone you see on the 4th of July this year. So today, my talk is about being a peacemaker, and I was going to talk about something else, and I had been studying, and then we dropped bombs in Iran. And I thought about all the world wars everywhere and our responsibility for so much needless. I mean, there's suffering, but this is needless suffering. And so I needed to talk about this and kind of take some time to stop and say, why human beings, why fellow humans are we constantly at war? For there to be war, there have to be sides, and there have to be good guys and bad guys, or the perception thereof. And I think the roots of war and aggression are not so hard to understand. The Buddha Dharma teaches us that the root is ignorance. And ignorance, as in misunderstanding of the fact that we're all connected and all dependent on each other. That one bit of ignorance makes a world of trouble. And it keeps us afraid because we think that we're separate and we're needing to grab and we're needing to defend ourselves and get what we can while we can for this imaginary separate being. And this root also can be seen as self-centeredness, right? I have to get mine, so I act from fear and from hatred and from greed. In order to kill each other, I think we need to first demonize and dehumanize the other. And I think we do that even now, just in the context of our politics. We demonize those with views that are different from our own. And we say, who ought now? I know I've said this, I say it still. Who are these people? Who are these people who could have the beliefs that they do? Who are these people out there somehow separate from me who can cause so much harm? And I think it's an important question if we ask that question without the self-righteousness, without the sarcasm, without the edginess, and actually said and cared about and had curiosity about, oh, who are the people that I don't understand that act in a way that I see as being really harmful? What if we really cared about who they are and really wanted to know? So one of the many books that I was studying and thinking about peacemaking was Father Greg Boyle's new book, and he spoke to the Sangha recently. Just such a brilliant heart. His new book is Cherished Belonging. And he writes this, he says, I want to propose that with reverence, we can overthrow the tyranny of our judgments and watch as a more available and tender heart appears. It's our God-given curiosity that makes judgment impossible. It opens the door for wanting more information. What can I know about you? Judgment is kept waiting in the hallway, he writes, while we lean in with curiosity. So he tells a story in this book about a lecture that he was giving. And in the lecture, he said he'd never met anyone evil. And someone from the audience called out, "Trust me, I have." You can imagine that, right? And so he writes, the audience laughed. I left it at that. But I thought, no, you haven't. You only think you did. We've all met the broken, the despondent and damaged, the desperate and unwell, the traumatized, the wounded, the injured, but never anybody evil. And then he writes, Buddhists see suffering where Western Christians may only see sin. We are all broken. And knowing that helps us recognize it elsewhere. So I think one of the ingredients to be peacemakers is that we need to be upheld by the view of basic goodness, a view of original beauty, as we heard from a beautiful indigenous teacher, Pat McCabe. Beautiful, original beauty rather than original sin. So my job for about 40 years and my career was as a public school teacher. And I worked with kids mostly who had been kicked out of other schools and had a just fierce, prodigious attitude going. And my job was to see and to speak to their Buddha nature, to see their original beauty. And it's not so hard. And boy, they came on really strongly with their act, but actually, um, to see and speak to their original beauty um, is a huge gift. And they respond. It's like, whew, finally somebody sees through my act, sees through this tough act. Mother Teresa says, if we have no peace, it's because we've forgotten that we belong to each other. So a number of residents and Sangha members are studying the precepts. And we have a little bit different way that we chant the 10th Pure Mind practice or precept. In Fusatsu, the way we chant it is this: I vow not to speak ill of the three treasures and vow to honor my life as an instrument of peacemaking. Vow to honor my life as an instrument of peacemaking. So I have lots of wonderful, uplifting stories to share from Father Greg and many other people that I've been reading. But before I do that, I want to slow down a little bit because I think this may be the most important thing that we do together here tonight, and ask you to go into your experience and consider this question. What will it take for you to fulfill the vow to honor your life as an instrument of peacemaking? What will it take to be a peacemaker in your family? What would you need to let go of, to pay attention to soften around? What would it take for you to be a peacemaker in the Sangha? What would you need to let go of, to pay attention to soften around? What would it take for you to be a peacemaker in your community? What would you need to let go of, to pay attention to? What would it take for you to be a peacemaker in relation to our planet and the environment? What would you need to let go of? What would you need to pay attention to? And then also, probably most fundamentally, what would it take for you to be a peacemaker with yourself? To practice non-aggression toward yourself, radical acceptance of yourself, knowing that you're enough just as you are. What would you have to let go of? What would you have to pay attention to? Thank you for that. Shakyamuni Buddha was a peacemaker. And I want to read you something from a article Roshi wrote about the Bodhisattva ideal. She wrote, historically, the Buddha did not hold himself apart from the social suffering of his time. He engaged in revolutionary acts of compassion, flattening out the racist caste system in his community, ordaining untouchables and women, sitting with the dying, ordaining a transformed serial killer, and more. As a young person, she said, I began to regard the Buddha as a peacemaker and culture change agent, and I embraced this view, which drove my practice deeper. So when I decided to give this talk about peacemaking, I started gathering wisdom from all my favorite people and walking around through my bookcases and piling up books, honestly, all around me, my supports. Thich Nhat Hanh, very foundationally. John Paul Lederach, Father Greg Boyle, Roshi Joan, Bernie Glassman, Kaz Tanahashi, dedicated his whole life to peacemaking. Alan Senaki, for those of you who know Alan, and Zenju, Earthlyn Manuel, Lama Rod. So after a day or two of this, I was kind of dizzy and stuck with my piles of beautiful wisdom and stories, wondering how to bring in some kind of essence. So I brought forward two questions. One is, what are the roots of war and aggression? Which I touched on and I think is fairly simple to see, not so simple to engage with, but our ignorance and misunderstanding of interdependence, that we are one body. We don't get it. And it leads us into a lot of suffering. And then what do we need, each of us, to turn towards? What do we need to understand and embody then to act as peacemakers? What are those things? So I made my own list, Buddhist practitioner that I am, and my list of what do we need to turn to and things I want to take up one at a time and look at are, we need commitment. We need to set and keep true to a deep intention. We need to understand inclusivity and interbeing deeply. And also we need to look deeply, which is one of Thich Nhat Hanh's most beautiful teachings. What is it to look deeply into anything and to see our interbeing and also our responsibility? We need to enact and understand moral imagination and together action. So I have some stories. This is making me very nervous because I'm not going to be able to tell them all, but I'll just start. Because to me, that's really these stories of people and how they live their life in this way as peacemakers are really inspiring. And so the first example is Bernie Glassman. It's so interesting. I was looking through his Bearing Witness book, and he early on tells this story of his 55th birthday. So he's 55, and he's already been a Zen priest for probably 15 years and developed this incredible mandala of service, the Greystone mandala, and in his community brought in low-cost housing and jobs and job training. And each time he saw a need, he would turn toward that need. And so 55 years old, having brought all these gifts forward, he decided to spend his 55th birthday on the steps of the White House. And he sat in the winter, it was January, for 5 days with the question, what can I do about homelessness, AIDS, this was in the 90s, and violence in this country? So during a very cold winter, to mark and celebrate his birthday, he sat for 5 days with those questions, with people coming and going. And 55th birthday, sitting with his deep dedication, felt that something more was called for. And so what came out of that actually time of reflection was thinking about all the people, all the peacemakers, all the activists around him who just were discouraged, were in a state of deep discouragement. And out of that time, he founded the Zen Peacemaker Order as a place where people could come together and train and learn from each other. The way he put it was many people, it could be a training ground for many people who said they wanted to do something but didn't know what. And I mean, could be everybody in this room and everyone joining us from the cloud. You know, we look out at the world and don't know what to do. And so he writes, they would find inside themselves the answers to their own questions. They would find out about what peacemaking was. And then he writes, and what is peacemaking? You won't find the answer in this book. He says it's about living a questioning life without fixed ideas, bearing witness to every situation, no matter how difficult or painful. I can't tell you how to make peace, but what I can tell you is how to give up our certainties and live life fearlessly. So similar, these three actual stories, when I looked at them, there's a similarity that I will highlight and that you will probably hear. Father Greg Boyle, years ago, his appointed pastor in a mission church in Boyle Heights, which was right at the middle of gang activity, one of the most violent neighborhoods in LA. So same thing, like, okay, what's needed here? So recognizing the need for alternatives to gang life, he started working, brought together community members. They developed programs to provide jobs and support for gang members. And then each thing kind of led to him seeing the next need. So he expanded to legal services, job training, tattoo removal, legal assistance, educational and housing support, substance abuse counseling, mental health services, and now his organization is the largest gang intervention organization in the world. But here's what he said that I think is so helpful and important. He said, we're outcome aware. Obviously, if you look at all the incredible outcomes of his work, we're outcome aware, but not outcome driven. What drives us is the person in front of us. What drives us is the person in front of us. and learning from the situation in front of us. So the third story is one you may have heard along the way in the last few years. Several people, I think, have brought it up. There's a story in Roshi Jones, Standing on the Edge, about the women of La Patrona. And the story is very similar. What drives us is the person in front of us. And this is a story of two young girls, small village in Veracruz. They went out to buy breakfast for their family, went to the tortilleria, went to the bread, got bread for the family, a few things to take home for the family. And this small village is where daily a train goes by following migrants, and they're stacked all over the train. And they're calling out as these girls walk by, Madre, we're hungry. And so the girls get near enough the train, throw them the food, come home, apologize to their family and say, this is the situation. And from that response, from that appropriate response, the same story as Father Greg's, same story, people gathered around. What do we need to do? Many of the women in the village became involved. And now in that village, migrants are offered a clinic, there's a rest house, there's a kitchen, and many, many meals are handed out. So many years later, when this help is still going on in the village, um, one of the women was interviewed about, well, why are you doing this? Do you think you'll keep doing it? And she says, well, God gives me life and migration continues to exist. I believe I will be here helping. While God gives me life and migration continues to exist, I believe I will be here helping. Exact echo of what we were chanting for a whole month when we were studying the Bodhisattvas. As long as space remains, as long as beings remain, may I too remain to end the suffering of the world. So this kind of deep vow that just gets planted like a seed and then nourished. Father Greg talks a lot and teaches a lot about this book, about what he calls cherishing. And he says cherishing, it's not just a feeling. Cherishing is love with its sleeves rolled up. Probably I'm going to be able to talk to about maybe two of my list. So maybe Kodo will allow me a part two to this talk at some point, but I'm just going to keep going for now. The next asked to talk about the next aspect of peacemaking, which is maintaining a view of inclusivity and non-separation, this view of interbeing. So Thich Nhat Hanh, we need the vision of interbeing. We belong to each other. We can't cut reality into pieces, the well-being of this and the well-being of that. So we have to do things together. Every side is our side. There is no evil side. And he tells a story that I will repeat. He tells many beautiful stories. This is from Peace in Every Step, which is a very old, beautiful book of his, many books, about young prostitute in Manila. And this isn't so much about a specific young prostitute as about the many, many young prostitutes in this city and many cities where young girls come from the country where their families are not able to feed themselves and care for themselves and keep themselves healthy because of the poverty in their countries and in their communities, and they come to the city. And maybe they think they'll be able to have a cart selling awas, or maybe they think that they'll be able to find some kind of a simple job to send money home. And often, they're lured into how much money they can make to send back to their families if they work as prostitutes. And so, he rolls out this story just kind of looking at what that is for a young girl who then is living this life full of suffering, with much shame, and maybe looks at a young woman going by with her family in her the safety of her family, well dressed, and is full of shame, comparing herself. And what he teaches us in this story is she's not separate from the other woman. Everything that she is her ongoing causes of and conditions. He says, only by seeing with the eyes of interbeing can that young girl be free from her suffering. Only then will she understand that she is bearing the burden of the whole world. What else can we offer her? Looking deeply into ourselves, we see her and will share her pain and the pain of the whole world. Then we can begin to be of real help. Bernie writes this: a peacemaker sees his life according to harmony. Each person, each encounter is nothing other than the oneness of life, nothing other than him or her. Peacemaker action comes about when we are the suffering of others. This is looking deeply. When we are the suffering, when we are the hungry children, when we are the homeless mother. And Thich Nhat Hanh takes us further because it's not so hard for us to feel into and completely become one with the suffering of those who we see as victims. But what about having compassion for all beings? What about realizing, as Thich Nhat Hanh challenges us to realize, that we're not only the young girl who jumps off the pirate ship having been raped by the pirate, but we're also the pirate. He says, when we want to understand something, we can't just stand outside and observe it. We need to enter deeply into it and be one with it in order to really understand. If we want to understand a person, we have to feel his feelings, suffer his suffering, and enjoy his joy. So, what does it take for us to do that? What do we have to be willing to let go of? What do we have to pay attention to? What does it take for us to enter deeply and be one with others? Stop, care, attend, listen from the heart. Practice perspective taking, but it really requires us to loosen our grip on our version of reality. When he's talking about taking perspectives, he does something really beautiful. There's this little incident with Thich Nhat Hanh now. He's in Boston and he's having a conversation. He's there giving a talk, I guess, at a university, but there's a river right there, and he's very excited to see the river, and he walks down the bank, and he washes his face and washes out his mouth, and people are watching him freaking out, right? Um, because he's drinking from this polluted river. And he says, if we can't feel the rivers, so it's not just the other humans, if we can't feel the rivers and the mountains and the air and the animals and other people from within their own perspective, from within their own perspective, the rivers will die and we'll lose our chance for peace. So he really challenges us to see that the roots of war, and he says specifically, the roots of war are in the way we live our daily lives, the way we develop our industries, build up our society, consume goods. We have to look deeply into the situation, and we'll see the roots of war. We can't just blame the other side. We have to transcend the tendency to take sides. He goes on this way. This is why to learn to change our way of daily life so that there's more mindfulness, more peace, and more love is a very urgent thing. And we can do that beginning today. What time do I have to stop? Senko. Now? 6:26. Okay. I'm just going to go straight to another story because they're the most, they touch us in the heart. So moral imagination is something that John Paul Lederach, who's a Mennonite, world-renowned peacemaker, writes about and talks about. This capacity to not only really be with what's here and with suffering, but to see possibilities beyond what the obvious is. So basically, not knowing and bearing witness to see beyond the obvious. And there's this beautiful story. I'm going to end with this story, unfortunately. We'll see if I get to do part two. But he has a book called Moral Imagination, and he tells several stories to illustrate how that works, what that is. And the story I'm going to tell you is a story of women from Wahir. Wahir is a area in northeast Kenya, and it's one of those areas where everything comes together to clash, and it's very, very violent on a daily basis. Children with guns, violent clan disputes that make their lives almost impossible in this small village. And at some point, when the violence was at its most painful, a few women gathered and said, our lives are unbearable. There must be something that we can do. And so they said, we have to feed our families. It's not safe for us to even go to the market to sell and buy food. So maybe what we can do is at least make the market safe. So this was their first goal. There was maybe a dozen of them. And they looked at the dynamics of the market, figured out their approach. They established monitors. Some of the women said that they would be monitors, and they were at the market, and they would report any abuse that they saw. And slowly over time, they created the market as a zone of peace. And more women joined their organization, Wahir Women's Association for Peace. And from the market, they expanded their activity to broader violence that was still affecting their everyday lives in a really profound way. And so they thought, what can we as a group of women do next? What's needed within the context of our situation? And they decided that they needed to work with the clan elders because all these clans were armed and warring each other. But that seemed pretty out there, especially for a group of women. But looking at how and thinking through how the elder system worked and who the actual key elders were, they came up with a plan. And they worked through those key elders, and they really helped the elders see what they would have to gain by working together. And pretty soon there was the Elders Association for Peace. And everything that they did went like this. So the elders were actually excited by the progress that they saw and the good that they saw could come of them working together. They reached out to the government officials and got support from them. And then who was next? All the young, not even men and women, boys and girls who were armed by these different clans. So they approached the youth and worked with the youth. What did the youth need? They needed jobs. They needed to be able to build a life. So there was a youth organization for peace. I think this is so amazing, from the first step in all these cases. And then they got the businesses involved so that there could be more opportunities for the youth to actually build a life in their town. So in this example, and it's a good one to end with because you can see all the ingredients of my list, all the ingredients that I've brought up, the deep intention that they held to and carried forward to have a peaceful community. And then inclusivity and interbeing, realizing that this leads to that, and this depends on that, and my safety depends on yours. Looking deeply, really considering what will serve in each of those steps. The moral imagination to do that, and together action. So, stay tuned. This is such an important thing. But I do want to end by saying that if we can come back and you can leave, to know that each of us needs to be able to still ourselves, find our intention, and kind of walk our talk, basically. We need us. We need people like us. Mahayana Buddhism says that you are that person, that each of us is that person. So if you can take home this question of how we're peacemakers here and now, in our families, in our Sangha, in our community. I have faith that just like in these examples, it will spread, it will grow. Our peacemaking matters. Okay. 6:33. Thank you so much for your attention and for your care to even show up here on this beautiful night. And we'll end with the 4 Bodhisattva vows.